The nickname Porkopolis was first published at about 1840, but it had roots going back to the 1820s when a banker named George W. Jones, known as Bank Jones, so he really cornered that market, often talked about the number of hogs roaming the streets for slaughter in letters that he wrote back to Liverpool. That person he wrote letters to ultimately gifted him a pair of papier-mâché pigs, was dubbed to have been from Porkopolis. The name was a goof, probably not a compliment. Anyway, now for today's Big Bite, which I admit there is a bit of a pivot going on here. I'm very excited to have the owners of Carl's Deli coming on the show, Cameron Kurtz and Sydney Turnbull. And since we are talking about some of the best sandwiches in the city, I wanted to go over Cincinnati's history as Porkopolis. The early to mid-1800s, really a pivotal time in Cincinnati history. We've talked about before. That's when Nicholas Longworth started turning the land he owned into vineyards to kickstart this area's international wine boom. Cincinnati was chartered as a town in 1802, and within just a few years of that, steamboats and the Ohio River helped Cincinnati grow to a population of nearly 10,000 by the year 1820, about the time that it was chartered as a city. During this time is also when service businesses like restaurants and hotels started growing here because of all those travelers who were coming through. This is when Findlay Market was developing as one of 9 public markets in the area, although it would not get its famous central tower until about 1850, during a time of really rapid growth. 1850 is when the first Jewish hospital was established here in the U.S., and Cincinnati's population hit over 115,000. Excuse me. This is also about the time revolution in parts of Germany and parts of Europe fueled an immigration push into this region, with Germanic people accounting for about a third of the population. That's when we saw that big Germanic growth here locally. What we now know as Central Parkway, running right outside this studio, is where the Miami and Erie Canal ran through town, feeding into the Ohio River. Those waterways were crucial for the growth that this area saw, how farmers in the north, northern Ohio, southern Michigan, got their hogs to market. This is where the Porkopolis fuel would come from. That water, and of course the German population here, is also where the term over the Rhine came from, as travelers crossed the canal, went over the Rhine. But back to the pigs. Shout out to the Cincinnati Nature Center for producing some really interesting videos like this one that explains the surprising role that nut trees like acorn played in developing Cincinnati's pig population.
As the United States swept westward into what is now Ohio, pioneers brought this tradition of pig rearing with them. Early farmers in the Cincinnati area would turn their semi-feral pigs over into the forest each fall to nosh on the abundant beech nuts, acorns, and hickory nuts that grew here. Mast was so important that the value of land was for a time based on the number of nut-producing trees on that land. This practice continued into the early 1800s as Cincinnati's pork processing industry grew into a behemoth of stockyards and disassembly lines. Its location on the river and newly developed pork preservation techniques allowed Cincinnati to corner the hog market. Each fall, farmers and fatteners would drive pigs by the hoof into downtown Cincinnati. Pigs wandered loose in the streets and alleys, running underfoot. The smell was, let's say, unpleasant. As one 19th century British traveler wrote, "As there is a railway system and a hotel system, so there is also a pig system, by which this place is marked out from any other. Huge quantities of these useful animals are reared after harvest in the cornfields of Ohio, and on the beech masts and acorns of its gigantic forests. At a particular time of year they arrive by thousands, brought in drove and steamers to the number of 500,000 to meet their doom, when it is said that the Ohio runs red with blood."
Again, shout out to the Cincinnati Nature Center for that kind of work. Let's look at that last pic you saw in that video, though. It's a picture from Harper's Weekly, obviously not a photograph, from 1860. People driving hogs to slaughter right along Cincinnati residential streets. Anyone ever talking about Cincinnati history is probably referencing the writings of Charles Sist. He began publishing books about Cincinnati as early as the 1840s, and he's written about a million things. He says that was when this area had 4 dozen packing houses that employed 1,200 men and produced more than $3 million worth of packed pork, 1840s. The nickname Porkopolis was first published at about 1840, but it had roots going back to the 1820s when a banker named George W. Jones, known as Bank Jones, so he really cornered that market, often talked about the number of hogs roaming the streets for slaughter in letters that he wrote back to Liverpool. That person he wrote letters to ultimately gifted him a pair of papier-mâché pigs, was dubbed to have been from Porkopolis. The name was a goof, probably not a compliment, and it apparently stuck. Getting back to 1860, when that Pigs in the Streets picture's from, pork workers in Cincinnati doubled to 2,400 men, and nearly 500,000 hogs were slaughtered here every year. At least that was at the peak. We were growing a reputation for being a wine capital of the world around that time. That wouldn't last, of course. Diseases like black rot took a big chunk out of the local wine industry, and the Civil War did the rest. For the pork business here, it was also the Civil War that cut off Cincinnati's primary southern trade routes. Getting those pigs packed up and shipped south to areas like New Orleans became an issue. Also, the rise of railroads is really what made our riverfront less important. And as the frontier moved west, railroads allowed hogs to be processed directly in cities closer to the Great Plains, like Chicago and Kansas City, making things more efficient. But you know, destruction does lead to creation. And all that pork did mean a massive surplus of animal fat. And there was a usage for that animal fat. As you might know, guys like English candle maker William Proctor and Irish soap maker James Gamble had some ideas on what to do with that stuff. But that's for a future Big Bite that we will get to another time.